I used to be afraid of heaven. Really. As a child, I would sometimes lie in bed at night and be overcome by dread. This haunting existential question would play in my mind over and over. If I live forever, what am I going to do? How can I avoid getting bored? Not like a little bored, but like everything is meaningless bored. I would try to come up with these little scenarios in my head that might explain how to live forever and not get bored. Maybe it worked in cycles with a new kind of heaven every 1,000 years or so. Maybe reincarnation is real. Maybe after you run out of things to do in heaven, you just stop existing. None of those are true, of course, and they didn't really help. I think that my fear of eternity went away around the time I first fell in love. And I think I know why. Because with that experience, I realized on some level how it was possible to do something forever and never get bored. So what is the answer to the problem of eternal boredom? To see God's face. Now that's not the answer I came up with. That is all over Scripture. Our psalm sings of longing to see the face of God. Prophets and patriarchs in the Old Testament were eager and afraid to see the face of God. St. John's letter speaks of seeing God as he is. And Jesus himself gives us the beatitude, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see God." These put to words the intuition that cured my fear of eternity. Now, you might ask, how can looking at God's face be so great that it will never get old? I mean, have you ever stared into someone's eyes for a long time? It can get kind of weird and awkward most of the time. And even if it doesn't, surely you get bored, right? Not when it's God's face. Think of the way that babies can stare at the face of someone for a very long time. Children are born with a natural sense of the human face. Think of the way it feels to look into the eyes of someone you love who loves you back. A priest friend of mine loves to tell the story of when he visited a hospital and there was an older couple. And as he was standing by the bed of the wife, the husband got very upset with him and complained, "You're standing in the way. I want to look at my wife." They weren't saying anything, just looking at each other. There's something powerful about the human face, and that something is a dim reflection of the face of God. Think of the first time you fell in love, the excitement, anticipation, and dreams that came with it, the eagerness to have that person look back at you with love. Think of the ways you thought that they were perfect in your imagination. Eventually, reality sets in, and we see their imperfections. But imagine if that never happened. Imagine if they were as perfect as you hoped, and that the more you looked, the more you saw of it. Think also of your loneliest moments, when you feel misunderstood or ignored. Imagine someone to look into your eyes and know exactly what is going on. A gaze that says, "I am with you in your most hidden, confusing, and mysterious places. The things about yourself you can't express, I see them, and you can see them reflected back in those eyes." Think also of your worst sin, your biggest secret, your greatest shame. And imagine that someone could look at you with love and not judgment or anger. St. John Vianney once was surprised to find this parishioner sit in his church at the same time every day. And he wasn't moving or doing or saying anything, just sitting there. So John asked him, "What are you doing?" And the man gestured to the tabernacle and said, "I look at him, he looks at me. Eventually, that man had to go to work or home, but for that brief period each day, when all of his other needs were met, he most wanted to spend that freedom being looked at with love. These kinds of things and more are brief glimpses into what it means to look at the face of God. And if that doesn't convince you, then consider today's festival, the Solemnity of All Saints. When we recall the thousands of known saints and the many thousands more who are unknown. When we consider men and women who traveled the world with nothing to proclaim the gospel message. Those who spent thousands upon thousands of days doing nothing but praying and reading and writing and rejoicing in that prayer. Those who suffered horrifying, cruel deaths rather than reject God or sin against him. Some of them even singing and rejoicing as they suffered. Think of the trillions of dollars and hours spent by all the saints of all of history on serving the poor and caring for the sick and showing love to people who often didn't appreciate it, the way Jesus loved the people who were crucifying him. What could motivate these people? What could motivate these kinds of actions? And what about us? We are all called to holiness. We know that that means saying no to so many fun and exciting things in this world. That call to holiness could mean losing careers and family and friends and throwing away our time and money at a church filled with imperfect people. What could be worth that? The face of God. In the end, the saints are those who understood that looking into the very eyes of love itself was worth it. And even if you fall for the lie that everyone goes to heaven no matter what, this possibility of seeing God's face should motivate us, drive us to avoid sin and seek holiness now. Because as with marriage, the harder you work and the more you're willing to endure to make it work, the greater the joy and the peace when you do see love reflected back in this person you love. If you just barely get into heaven, you will see God's face. But the greater your love on earth, the clearer your vision will be, and the deeper you will see into his eyes. More than perfect food and fun, more than the perfect body we'll all have in heaven, what conquers this world, what conquers a fear of infinite boredom, is being able to see love itself looking at you with perfect understanding. How can that kind of love get old? It can be overwhelming, which is why some choose never to look. But if we do see it, how could we get tired of it? If you would like to know this kind of joy, seek his face now. In adoration, in Scripture, the lives of the saints, the face of your neighbor in need. Take time to recall those moments in prayer when you've seen glimpses of his face, awareness of his presence. And think of those moments with gratitude. And don't be afraid to ask. Ask God to show you his face, to help you understand what is so valuable about this vision, this gaze that has enabled even children to suffer death willingly, if only it meant another chance to see it. It is the face of love, a gaze that wants nothing more than to look at you with love. Blessed are you if you are willing to sacrifice everything else, to live and die just for the chance to meet that gaze with your own and never turn away.